Hello everybody, Germ here, and I am mentally diseased. And so are you, so are you, so are you, and actually none of us are. But are we really though? Let's talk about the name. I get a lot of comments about it. Most people think it's a hoot, but occasionally some people come along and they're mighty offended by it. They don't understand why I would have the audacity to call my channel such a thing. And then there are the apologists, and well, what are they gonna do? Call me mentally diseased?
Your YouTube channel is a joke. Jehovah is going to smite you. You were never a real witness. Piece of worthless.
Huh. Turns out that's exactly what they're gonna do. Mentally diseased. Manifesto. Why I embrace my apostasy, and you should too. Let's talk about it. Words. They're a thing that happens with a quick vibration of the vocal cords combined with an intricate movement of the tongue, lips, and jaw. Sometimes they happen with the stroke of a pen, or the tap on a keyboard, or, as recently as in the last 10 years, tapping on a piece of glass. Boy, we sure are a better society thanks to that invention. We summon up these things called words with barely any effort on our part, impartial to the devastation we inflict on others in doing so. Cults and high control groups use words to control their members. They associate certain words with terrifying images to keep you fearful, obedient. Armageddon, apostate, masturbation, fornication, homosexual. Did your stomach lurch at any of these words? I'll bet it did. These are all words you have been conditioned to feel a physical reaction to. Take the word apostate. Apostates are painted by both religion and government as these deranged people who have been hollowed out to be controlled by Satan and his demons to ensnare you in a life of sin and debauchery. At some point in your life, maybe even now, your mental image of an apostate probably looked something like this.
What's happening?
Apostate, origin Greek, meaning deserter, runaway slave, or in its current form, somebody who just leaves their religion. Used as early as the 3rd century to criminalize defecting from the state religion, as of 2014, 25 countries still criminalize public apostasy. If Jehovah's Witnesses ran their own country, they would probably make 26 and would proudly execute faithless defectors.
That's Jehovah's enemies. They're gonna vanish like smoke.
Notable figures of apostasy include Jesus Christ, Ahsoka Tano, oh, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Remember Charles Taze Russell's poor, forgotten association of Bible students? They're still around, and Jehovah's Witnesses are not Russell's original religion. Bad, Rutherford, bad. In conjunction with the established negative connotation around the word apostate, Jehovah's Witnesses throw a few modifier cards down to enhance the fear. If you don't already have an idea of why my channel is named Mentally Diseased, you should know that the name comes from what Jehovah's Witnesses call their apostates. They say that they have a mental disease and imply that the disease is even contagious. It's rarely enough to just call them apostates. They must be mentally diseased apostates. This is done to further dehumanize people that they don't want you interacting or sympathizing with. And how well it works shows in how Jehovah's Witnesses interact with someone once they've learned they're apostates. There's something in them that really believes it's a contagious disease and they don't want to catch it. But they don't just do this to keep you from talking to them. They do this to make you fear ever becoming one. Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, are not the only high control group guilty of misusing words in this way. Minorities have endured the wielding of words against them for years. Story time. When I was a very wee boy, probably 6 or 7 years old, the first time I ever saw anyone gay was on a homeschool field trip with other homeschooled witness kids. We went to the zoo, as witnesses do. It was a free day, and we had a great time marveling at the idea that these animals won't be in cages anymore one day. They'll be in our backyards. They'll be our friends in paradise. All the things witnesses usually think when they're at a zoo. But somewhere in that trip, a darkness fell over our parents. They shielded our eyes from what I couldn't tell right away, and for the rest of the day they were quiet and they grumbled things to each other that I couldn't hear. On the way home, my dad immediately began ranting about the nerve of these two men who had the audacity to hold hands in public. Oh my gosh. I had to think because, well, I'd seen it, but it hadn't registered as anything significant to me. He told me that they were mentally diseased homosexuals, depraved slaves of their fleshly desires that would be done away with in Armageddon. I never knew before then that a sort of love could be wrong. This is the funny thing about homophobia, is nobody's actually born with it. It's artificial. It's instilled in you. And the anger in his voice was so absolute, the disgust contagious, that I clenched my fists and I made myself angry at them too. And that's the first step. To immediately associate your first experience with a thing with feelings of disgust and hatred. Aren't they humiliated? How can they so flagrantly display their depravity? I believed immediately that one of the worst things I could ever do is become one of those people. This is the same way they introduce the idea of apostates to anyone. They teach you immediately to hate the thing, and in doing so, instill an unspoken fear in you of ever becoming it. They forbid you from ever talking to these people, which in turn keeps you from ever being able to acknowledge that they're anything more than the sins you've perceived they've committed. They are perpetually the other, and they are nothing but the sums of their sins. Just so long as you don't ever talk to them. How can anyone become a real human being to you if you're only allowed to know them as a derogatory phrase? High-control religions do this to people who leave their religion. They do it to people who follow other faiths. The world at large has done it to people of color and sexual minorities, even those with disabilities. These minorities have found a way to combat this oppression. My generation and generations of gay men before me endured years of words like queer and queen, fruit and fairy hurled at us like stones. These words were accompanied by fists, the taste of blood, bruises that would last for weeks, broken bones, and sometimes death. In 1990, an organization called Queer Nation was founded. They would be what some in our community would call aggressive activists. They weren't subtle. In the very year they were founded, they circled an anonymous flyer in the New York Pride Parade. It said this: "Queer. Do we really have to use that word? It's trouble. Every gay person has his or her own take on it. For some, it means strange and eccentric and kind of mysterious. That's okay. We like that. But some gay girls and boys don't. They think they're more normal than strange. And for others, queer conjures up those awful memories of adolescent suffering. Queer. It's forcibly sweet and quaint at best, weakening and painful at worst. Couldn't we just use gay instead? It's a much brighter word, and isn't it synonymous with happy? Well, yes, gay is great. It has its place, but when a lot of lesbians and gay men wake up in the morning, we feel angry and disgusted, not gay. So we've chosen to call ourselves queer. Using queer as a way of reminding us how we are perceived by the rest of the world. It's a way of telling ourselves we don't have to be witty and charming people who keep our lives discreet and marginalized in the straight world. And when spoken to other gays and lesbians, it's a way of suggesting we close ranks and forget temporarily our individual differences because we face a more insidious common enemy. Yeah, queer can be a rough word, but it is also a sly and ironic weapon we can steal from the homophobe's hands and use against him. Be proud. Do whatever you need to do to tear yourself away from your customary state of acceptance. Be free. Shout. The idea began to catch. Gay people began to wear the word queer as a middle finger to all of those who had hurt them before. If you haven't read the manifesto, I highly recommend that you do, because the tone is very different from how we speak about it now. Taking on the label queer wasn't a cutesy moment the way many see it now. It was a moment of revolution. It was the moment that we were radicalized. And most importantly, it worked. A decade later, 2 of the most popular gay shows on TV included Queer as Folk and Queer Eye. Words that at one time were weapons against us belong to us now. The queers weren't the first to do such a thing. All sorts of minorities have laid claim to slurs once wielded against them, but religions have also reappropriated terms. The Holy Club, as they were known then, were mocked in the 1700s for being too methodical, so they went so far as to actually rename themselves Methodists. You can't fight it? Embrace it. Cults take it to another level. The more loaded the language, the higher the appropriation. If you were never a Jehovah's Witness, you'll quickly notice that their vernacular is, unusual. They have their own cadence of speaking. They use words that other people don't use, and many of those words have a different meaning for their members than they do for everyone else. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, I put little thought into the words I use. I just imitated the way others around me spoke, and I derived the meaning of those words based on the context the material they gave me to read. I never actually looked those words up. I never put a lot of thought into the things I was saying. This is one of the many reasons none of them realize they're in a cult. Their idea of a cult has been defined by how the society wants them to define it. It has no basis in fact. Their definition of a cult is a new or unorthodox religion and a religious sect with a human leader, which is hilarious because they do actually fit both of their own criteria, no matter how much they insist that they don't. But anyway, my point is, even if their definition of a cult is inaccurate, it doesn't matter, because Jehovah's Witnesses have decided to define the term on their own, and all of their followers have happily embraced that new definition. Other words they've reappropriated include worldly. The modern use of the word means someone who is experienced or sophisticated. That sounds good, right? There are sub-definitions that mean things like physical possessions or something similar to secular, anything that's not strictly spiritual related, but none of these really reflect the way that the word is used by Jehovah's Witnesses. They spit the word worldly. It is a pejorative. Worldly, to them, means anyone under the influence and thus under the control of Satan's system of things. It means misled, stubborn people who will rightly be slaughtered in Armageddon. Publisher. This one is the weirdest shit, y'all. A publisher is what they call an active baptized member. If you're a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're a publisher. They kind of avoid explaining why they use this terminology. When pressed, they might say something like it means that you're announcing God's kingdom, but the reality of the word is a publisher is a person whose business is the preparation and selling of books. There are people who sell books, which, if the book bag fits. I could go on and on about their loaded language. I'll save that for another video, though. I want to go back around to the word apostate. This is another word that they have reappropriated to mean whatever they want it to mean. Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't the only religion to demonize apostates. Governments do it too. But the weird thing about apostates to Jehovah's Witnesses is even then, it means something a little bit different to them than it does to everyone else.
How long are you grounded for?
I have to go see the elders, and then my dad will decide if the elders decide that I'm apostate.
Wait. Hold on, they think you're apostate? Yeah. No.
Yeah.
When I first left, I heard one of my old friends spit the word apostate at me, and I'd never heard anything so offensive in my life. I wasn't an apostate, how dare they? Because for Jehovah's Witnesses, leaving the religion or even getting disfellowshipped doesn't necessarily make you an apostate. You're not an apostate until you speak out against the religion. Apostate implies activist, even if it's just a baby activist that's only trashing the religion to your friends. Now, I wasn't trashing the religion. I was moving on with my life. I was letting them be. Hearing someone call me an apostate not only offended me, but it made me want to prove them wrong. It led me to signaling my virtue, to defending Jehovah's Witnesses when they came up in conversation. It led me to being a pomie for over a decade because I may have left the religion, but I was not about to be an apostate. The fear of that label is embedded deep, even after I made this channel, even after I proudly called it mentally diseased. A small part of me still feared. I'd wave my apostate flag around, but only where the people I used to know wouldn't see me. I shied away from the XJW community on Facebook because I knew many of my old witness friends were on Facebook, and I knew that they checked in on me from time to time. My old friends, my family that are still in it, and despite everything and all of this time that's passed, I still wanted them to think of me as an acceptable XJW. I didn't want them to think of me as an apostate. But I think back on that person who called me an apostate all those years ago, despite the fact that at the time I still believed and I still defended them and I had every intention of coming back. And I realized that it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter when I was a Jehovah's Witness. No matter how exemplary I was, they would always make assumptions about who I am. They would always call me whatever they wanted to, even if they had to redefine the words they use in order to do it. If the shoe doesn't fit, make a bigger shoe and insist that it's the same one as before, just like they do to everyone else. The worldly people, the apostates, their publishers, and their sheep. And I think back on all these other words. Queer, a word that just meant something odd or strange before it became a hateful word, until it became our own. Words like secular, a word that originally meant temporal as opposed to eternal, before meaning mundane, before suddenly becoming religious and becoming a word for anything not strictly religious. Interesting that a word that sounds similar to secondary and used to mean mundane became a word to describe all things that aren't religious. All things that are a waste of time. Secular. What it means to be a Jehovah's Witness has changed. A bachelor was once the word for a young knight. A naughty person used to mean someone who had not. They were poor. Girl once referred to any young child, regardless of sex. Language evolves. The meaning of a word changes as people use it differently because ultimately, words mean whatever we want them to mean. They can be wielded as a weapon, and then they can be taken away. Freaks and geeks and nerds and losers, we hid from those words in school, and now we put them in our online dating profiles. The C word, the B word, the N word, deplorables, and nasty women. Because even though words can be the tools of oppression, when used by the oppressed, they can also hold immeasurable power. So why leave these harmful words in a place where they can wound, when we can pick them back up, dust them off, and find ways to reuse them in order to bring light to those who have been harmed? Derogatory terms get people's attention, and oppressed people need others' attention. I am not mentally diseased, not truly, but that is always the term they will use for me, so long as I continue to call out their injustices. They call us mentally diseased as a slap in the face, to make us feel ashamed of ourselves, to remind us of the stigma and the fear they've instilled in us, and they do it because they want us to sit back down. They want us to be silent, because they want their apostates to continue defending the faith, even after they've left. They want you to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses even after they've taken your family away from you. But that term only holds power so long as we leave that power in their hands. So I'm taking that power away from them. I'm under no illusion that I will single-handedly change what the entire world thinks of when they hear mentally diseased. But if I can help soften that blow for just a few people that watch my channel, then I'm really happy. So when you hear the term mentally diseased, I don't want you to feel shame. I don't want you to be offended. I want you to think of all the others like you who survived an abusive cult and found the strength to stand up to them. People that experience heartache and exile in a way that most people could never dream of today and found a way to laugh again. If mental disease is the audacity to stand up to your oppressor, to refuse to let them hold you back from a full life, then mentally diseased it shall be. And when they look in on us, the mentally diseased, and see that we are enjoying our lives, that we laugh, that we build new families, and we stand up for our fellow man regardless of religion or skin color, sexuality, or any other background, maybe they'll see that there's nothing to be afraid of after all. And so I read again the manifesto presented by Queer Nation, slightly modified. And when spoken to other XJWs, it's a way of suggesting we close ranks and forget temporarily our individual differences because we face a more insidious common enemy. Yeah, mentally diseased can be a rough term, but it is also a sly and ironic weapon we can steal from the Jehovah's Witnesses and use against them. Be proud. Do whatever you need to do to tear yourself away from your customary state of acceptance. Be free. Shout. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Fireshard, Covert Fade, and all my supporters on Patreon that made this video possible. And a very special thank you to all my mentally diseased comrades with the audacity to put themselves out there to contribute in whatever way they can. If you like this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe. I'm a little slow at making them and they tend to fall off the algorithm, so be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any uploads.